Sanctions are one of the tools of international policy used to pressure countries that violate international norms and rules. However, the effectiveness of sanctions is often questioned. In this text, we will explore the main reasons why sanctions do not always achieve their goals. Economic ineffectiveness ***, alternative markets ***. One of the key reasons for the ineffectiveness of sanctions lies in the availability of alternative markets. Countries subjected to sanctions often find new trading partners willing to cooperate despite international pressure. This reduces the economic impact of sanctions and allows rogue states to continue their activities. Alternative markets can be geographically diverse. For example, if Western countries impose sanctions on a particular country, it may find new trading partners in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. This allows it to offset the losses from sanctions and continue its economic activities with minimal changes. An example is the situation with sanctions against Russia. After the West imposed sanctions in 2014, Russia began actively developing economic relations with China, India, and other Asian countries. This allowed it to compensate for the losses from the sanctions and maintain economic stability. Additionally, countries under sanctions can use various methods to circumvent the restrictions. These can include gray market trade schemes, smuggling, and the use of shell companies. All these factors reduce the effectiveness of sanctions and allow offending countries to continue their activities. Self-sufficiency ***. Some countries possess significant natural resources and a developed domestic industry, making them less dependent on foreign trade. This allows them to cope more effectively with sanctions and minimize their economic impact. For example, Russia has vast reserves of oil, gas, and other natural resources. This makes it less vulnerable to economic sanctions, as it can meet its needs with domestic resources. Additionally, a developed industry enables the production of many goods necessary for domestic consumption, reducing dependence on imports. Iran is another example of a country with significant natural resources and a developed industry. Sanctions against Iran have been in place for many years, yet the country continues to develop its economy using domestic resources and alternative trade routes. An important aspect of self-sufficiency is the development of agriculture and food security. Countries capable of meeting their food needs are less vulnerable to sanctions, as they do not need to import food products. This allows them to maintain stability under economic restrictions. Political ineffectiveness ***. Internal consolidation ***. Sanctions can lead to the consolidation of power in the hands of the ruling regime. Governments often use external pressure as a tool to strengthen internal legitimacy, portraying sanctions as aggression from foreign enemies. This enables regimes to mobilize the population and suppress internal opposition. When a country faces external pressure, the population may rally around the leader, seeing them as a protector against external aggression. This phenomenon is known as the rally round the flag effect. In such conditions, government regimes can use nationalist rhetoric to mobilize the population and suppress internal opponents. An example is the situation in Iran. In response to US and Western sanctions, the Iranian government has intensified nationalist rhetoric, portraying the sanctions as aggression against the Iranian people. This has allowed the regime to strengthen its power and suppress internal opposition. In Russia, after the imposition of Western sanctions in 2014, there was also a rise in nationalist sentiments. The government used the sanctions as evidence of Western hostility and mobilized the population to support its actions in Ukraine and other international matters. Lack of international support for sanctions to be most effective. They must be supported by a broad international coalition. However, disagreements between countries and competing geopolitical interests often hinder the creation of such a coalition. Without global support, sanctions lose their strength and become less effective. When sanctions are imposed by only one or a few countries, while other countries continue to maintain economic ties with the target of the sanctions, their effectiveness is reduced. The target country can find new trading partners and continue its activities despite the imposed restrictions. An example is the situation with sanctions against North Korea. Despite numerous sanctions imposed by the US and its allies, North Korea continues to develop its nuclear program and maintain economic ties with China. This allows it to remain stable and minimize the impact of the sanctions. Disagreements between countries can be driven by various geopolitical interests. For example, China and Russia often do not support sanctions imposed by the West, as they see them as a threat to their influence and interests. This creates conditions for sanctions circumvention and reduces their effectiveness. Humanitarian consequences suffering of the population sanctions often harm not only the ruling elite, but also ordinary citizens. Economic restrictions lead to rising prices for essential goods, shortages of food and medicine, and a decline in living standards. This causes humanitarian crises and worsens the social situation in the countries under sanctions. When a country is subjected to sanctions, it often leads to the destruction of its economy. Business closures, job cuts, and rising unemployment become commonplace. Ordinary citizens face rising prices for food and essential goods, which reduces their purchasing power and lowers their quality of life. An example is the situation in Venezuela, where economic sanctions have led to a sharp decline in the standard of living. Food and medicine shortages, rising inflation, and unemployment have caused widespread hunger and health deterioration among the population. This has resulted in a humanitarian crisis affecting millions of people. Increase in illegal activities sanctions contribute to the development of black markets and illegal activities. Restrictions on imports and exports stimulate smuggling and corruption, undermining official economies and creating new security threats. When official trade channels become inaccessible due to sanctions, it creates conditions for the development of illegal trade. Smugglers and criminal groups begin to use gray market schemes to bypass sanctions and meet the demand for banned goods. This leads to increased corruption and undermines the country's economy. An example is the situation with sanctions against Iran. Restrictions on oil exports have led to the development of illegal oil trade involving criminal groups and corrupt officials. This undermines the official economy and creates new security threats in the region. Long-term consequences of sanctions reduction in innovation activity sanctions can limit access to advanced technologies and scientific research, slowing technological development and innovation in the country. Restrictions on the import of high-tech equipment and scientific exchange lead to stagnation in key industries. An example is the situation with sanctions against Russia, which have limited access to Western technologies and investments. This has slowed the development of high-tech industries such as biotechnology, and advanced equipment manufacturing. In the long term, this reduces the competitiveness of the economy and innovation activity. Increase in economic dependence countries under sanctions may become more dependent on a limited number of partners, making them vulnerable to external influences. This can lead to increased economic dependence on countries like China or Russia, which often serve as alternative partners. For example, Iran, facing Western sanctions, has become more dependent on economic ties with China. This creates asymmetrical economic relationships where Iran becomes vulnerable to China's policies and economic interests. Geopolitical consequences of sanctions escalation of international conflicts sanctions can contribute to the escalation of international conflicts and increase tensions between states. When one country imposes sanctions on another, it often provokes retaliatory measures and intensifies confrontation. An example is the situation with sanctions against North Korea, which have contributed to the escalation of the conflict on the Korean peninsula. In response to the sanctions, North Korea has continued to develop its nuclear program and threaten regional security. Formation of new alliances sanctions can contribute to the formation of new alliances between countries seeking to resist international pressure. These alliances can intensify geopolitical confrontation and create new challenges for international security. An example is the alliance between Russia and China, which has strengthened in response to Western sanctions. These two countries have started to cooperate more closely in various fields, including the economy, defense, and energy. This creates new geopolitical challenges and intensifies confrontation with the West. Ethical and legal aspects of sanctions violation of human rights sanctions often lead to human rights violations, especially when they negatively impact the population. Restrictions on access to food, medicine, and other vital goods can cause humanitarian crises and deteriorate public health. An example is the situation in Iraq in the 1990s, wherein sanctions led to a humanitarian crisis and deterioration in the health of millions of people. Restrictions on the import of food and medicine caused widespread hunger and mortality, especially among children. Legality and legitimacy of sanctions. Questions of the legality and legitimacy of sanctions are also important aspects. Sanctions imposed without the consent of the international community or bypassing international norms can be viewed as illegal and unjust. An example is the situation with unilateral sanctions imposed by the US against Iran, which have been criticized by the international community. Many countries consider these sanctions illegal because they were not approved by the Security Council. Alternative approaches to sanctions. Diplomatic methods. One alternative approach to sanctions is the use of diplomatic methods to resolve international conflicts. Negotiations, mediation, and peaceful initiatives can be more effective and less destructive than economic sanctions. An example is the peaceful resolution of the conflict between the US and Cuba in 2014, where diplomatic efforts led to the normalization of relations and the lifting of some sanctions. This approach demonstrated that diplomacy can be a more effective tool than economic pressure. Economic incentives. Using economic incentives instead of sanctions can also be an effective approach. Providing economic aid, investments, and trade preferences can encourage changes in state behavior and strengthen international cooperation. An example is the situation with Iran after the signing of the nuclear agreement in 2015. Lifting sanctions and providing economic incentives helps strengthen economic ties and improve international relations. Sanctions are a complex and ambiguous tool of international policy. While they can be effective in some cases, many factors reduce their effectiveness. Alternative markets, internal power consolidation, lack of international support, and humanitarian consequences all make sanctions not always an effective means of achieving political goals. Instead, the international community needs to seek more comprehensive and flexible approaches to solving global problems,